Caitlin Cadieux, an animator and illustrator.
And I'm Ira Marcks. I write and draw comics. And this is a podcast about the mysterious and magical process of bringing cartoon stories to life.
That's true. Welcome to Cartoon Feelings.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
I think this is going to be we can call this a cozy episode, I think.
Oh, a cozy tea time episode.
Do you think so?
I think we're going to touch on some dark topics.
Well, that fits in cozy for me.
Okay, then yes. Snuggle up with your favorite.
I mean, cozy is this is like a childhood favorite, you know?
Yes.
And childhood is a dark time. Yeah. But also cozy.
One of the scariest.
Yeah.
Also, the Holocaust will be mentioned at least once.
Oh, good. Oh, so you're bringing those tangents tonight. Because sometimes I feel like that's me. That's my role. But I think I have all the inspirational quotes. And if you have the Holocaust, that's good.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you can take care of the inspiration and I will bring the Holocaust. Yeah. In case you're having trouble figuring out what we're talking about Maurice Sendak. Ever heard of him? He's a children's book author and illustrator.
Yeah, and his iconic work, which has been adapted into an animated feature, which is why it fits. We're not just like a children's book podcast now.
They're kids' comics, right? Yeah. Everything, if it has pictures, it counts.
I think this is one of those episodes where it's more, not so much about the piece of animation, but like the importance of this figure.
Oh, it's more about the feelings than the cartoon.
Yeah, and like the feelings about the guy who, did so much for so many.
The man, the myth, the legend.
He is.
Mr. Sendak. That's true. It's like you probably know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
And if you don't, get out of here.
Oh, or is that your
I hated that. That wasn't
Brooklyn
good.
accent?
Cut that forever. Goodbye.
So, boy, where do we start? I think we should talk about the animated short that kind of like made me decide this fits in the show, and I proposed it because I have little to say about it. I'm sure we'll find lots of things, but I
haven't seen it, so take
you didn't
it away.
Watch it?
No, I didn't watch it.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Well, then I can describe it to you.
Okay.
All right, so of course we're talking about Where the Wild Things Are. We'll be talking a lot about Maurice Sendak, but we first need to build it out from the center of the 1973 7-minute short directed by Gene Deitch, who I guess was kind of famous for Tom and Jerry shorts.
What?
And
wow.
I wish, if you could pull it up, you should take a little look at it because the animation style is very distinct. It's more like it's like the book is brought to life. It's not Tom and Jerry-esque at all. It's a low frame count animation where every image kind of fades into the next.
I think I have actually seen this before in my youth at some point.
Yeah. It reminds me, coming out in 73, I think it reminds me of a lot of like 70s animation that fades in similar ways, like the introduction to Watership Down, which we'll get to someday, like things that look more just like highly detailed rendered illustrated work brought to life, not so much like converted to an animation style,
Yeah, honestly, it feels very lo-fi to me in a way where it's like, oh, this is what we have.
Right.
And we need to make a video. The higher-ups have said it needs to move. So we will do that.
And if you, dear listener, are aware of this animated adaptation, it's probably because you caught it on like a PBS station between episodes of Mr. Rogers or something. Because it's only 7 minutes. Like, where would you see it pre-internet,
The good old days.
It would just appear. The narration and the music it's very funny. I wish we could joke about it.
Pipe it in. To hell with editing it out. Put it in here.
Okay, maybe I'll put a quick little clip right here.
Where the wild things are.
There's a lot of trombones, like a bow bow type of thing. It's like very loose, ramshackly, I don't know, jazzy-ish.
It feels very PBS, now that you've mentioned that.
And the narration is quite abrasive. It's very loud, very close to the mic, and it's very like wild rumpusy. It's not trying to lull you to sleep.
Is it a child or an adult narrating?
It's this guy, Peter Steichel. Should I just read a page in the style? So I have my copy of Where the Wild Things Are from my childhood, released. Came out in like 91, I think. This is definitely the version I have looked at a million times. Let's just find a page. And when he came to the place where the wild things are, they roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. It's very like making a meal out of it type of
It's like
approach.
trumpety.
Yeah. Did you like?
I loved it.
Just jumped right into it.
Yeah, you could just finish that book. Spellbound.
I'm sure there's a copyright concern there. Should I have reworded that? Are we going to get sued?
Maurice, don't listen to this. Don't listen to this episode. Neither of us had the heart to look it up, but we're pretty sure he's passed away.
Yeah, this is information we don't want to know.
Do not tell us. We will ban you.
All right, so animated feature, again, something I kind of ran into as a youth, and it only did really so much as to remind me of the magic of the book itself. So we'll get into like some of the ways Maurice Sendak was inspired by like comics and animation and stuff. Like he talks about it a lot actually in his interviews. The first one I put on was him from a short documentary made by the Tate Museum in the 2000s. And he's sitting at his studio and all behind him are like all these Mickey Mouses from different eras. And while he's talking about like William Blake or like some poetry, like illuminated manuscript stuff, or like talking about the inspiration of Herman Melville. And then it cuts. And did you notice the Mr. Incredible on his marker stand?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah. I'm like,
he's just
cool.
like us.
He is. I can tell we would just be great friends.
Oh, Maurice, we have so much in common.
I think in common in the way that we might all hate each other.
Maybe.
Do you think he seems like he's just on his own plane?
Yes, I mean, he certainly seems isolated. And that's definitely true. I read in this book, so we're just going to jump right to this book real quick. We'll probably mention it a couple times. I have an art book, The Art of Maurice Sendak, 1980 to the Present. Text by Tony Kushner, that I think is a full delight. And if you can find it, I highly recommend picking it up. Like, not only is there a ton of art in here, which as somebody who is like only familiar really with his most famous stuff as a kid, like Where the Wild Things Are and In the Night Kitchen, I read both of those when I was a kid. He did way more than that. So there's a lot of stuff represented in here, and a lot of personal anecdotes. But there was one mention in here that he was living in a house, I think that we saw at least once in one of these documentaries that we were watching. And he was systematically like buying up all the land around him so that it couldn't be developed.
Yeah.
And yeah, like he clearly had a very intense, just from stuff that I've read, like a passion for the past a little bit. Like he had a little bit of a Luddite sensibility that I personally admire greatly and feel spiritually akin to. And so he was probably trying to, protect some of the woods and stuff. But also, yeah, I think he was a very private person. And just as like a harder pivot, I believe I learned in this book originally years ago that he was gay, but he didn't come out until he was like in his late 80s.
Yeah.
Like his parents never knew, and he was very secretive about it. But when you know that also is really interesting when you look back on his work, and a lot of it is about, like, there's an angst throughout for many reasons, but also sort of an isolation. And you're like, he was dealing with a lot, so much all the time. Like it definitely shows in his work.
I put kind of Edward Gorey in the same category as well, because he's like a guy who is gay, was now passed. But his life was, I think, a mystery to a lot of people as well, too, because it wasn't just part of the conversation for most of their creative lives. It wasn't what people wanted to identify them with. Like when you listen to Maurice Sendak talk, he's often talking about his like love of music and the opera, and he just kind of radiates with like a knowledge of literature and art through the ages. And there's very little talk about like his actual identity in a way that it is just like fundamental to any conversation about a creative now. It's just seems like it wasn't that long ago, but the more time goes on, it feels even longer and longer ago to watch those interviews with him. It's just the way people talk about their work and stuff seems so different now, right? Yeah,
well, he spent all of that one interview. There was one interview sent me right before I came over here to do this recording, and I sat and I watched all 15 minutes before I left. And he's just like going individually through stuff that he has in his studio space, not only inspirational content, but also like, oh, by the way, like my siblings and I made these toys together one summer. Here's how they work. like do, and then he's like, and here's a book that I really like.
Yeah.
I'll flip through it a little bit.
Ooh, okay. Here, slow down a little bit because I want to talk about. I think this is a great opportunity to talk about studio space and like creative spaces and where we all work. So this can be like through the lens of Maurice Sendak, like here's like some stages of creativity. Because he covers, in that interview, it's from 1965, worth looking up. It's right after he wins the Caldecott Award. So he's like on top of all children's
people
lit
want to know what
but
has
he's
you
so
ticking.
Well spoken, and he covers like so many things you would want to know about an artist and their process. So he begins with the studio. So all right, what did you mention? Oh, you mentioned the cute little toys that
his
what was it? His
handcrafted
brother
toys. His
made
brother
them? Yeah.
made the mechanisms of how they worked. So they're interactive toys, like wooden toys that if you pulled a lever, these characters would like interact in some way.
Yeah.
The first one he shows is a Red Riding Hood one where if you pull the lever, then Red Riding Hood like falls to the floor in terror and the wolf pops up out of the grandma's bed.
Yeah.
And he said his sister made the, like, I guess knitted the tiny quilt or, however she made it.
It's about the size of a Rubik's Cube also,
pretty
right?
tiny.
So it's like Polly Pocket size.
Yeah, like adorable, actually,
Yeah.
and beautiful. And he's like, all these like family children still come over and like play with these so much that I'm constantly having to fix them.
Yeah.
It was very cute little
And then
aside.
there's an Aladdin one with the same sort of synchronicity, whereas like Aladdin jumps back as the genie like
It
rises
pops up, yeah.
So cute. And also kind of speaks to this idea. I feel like it's really important for artists as an aspiring artist, let's say I was being introduced to Maurice Sendak, I wanted to really know what his life was like because only when you understand somebody's journey can you really feel that they're like an actual aspirational person. Like he was a really creative kid and it seemed like his whole family kind of was. Like he had like that enriching first stage that's like so important. Like this idea of like mechanical structures really speaks to the way he is able to articulate the breakdown of his process and like designing a book. So I just thought that was so neat that he pointed out those like cute little mechanical things.
Yeah. Oh, and I love that he shows some of his book dummies and they're microscopic.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, what? I don't know that much about. I mean, maybe that's common. I don't know. I hadn't seen it before, but I know what a book dummy is. And he's just like, here's the first one for Where the Wild Things Are. And it's literally like a centimeter tall, very long strip of paper that you flip. There's multiple drawings down the strip that would like tell the story, the original story.
And the original story was Where the Wild Horses Are.
Yeah,
did you know that?
Missed opportunity,
Yeah.
I think. Because he claims, he's like, well, I couldn't draw horses. And I was like, I'm looking at some sketches of horses right now.
They look decent.
And I think they're pretty quality.
Yeah.
But I trust your judgment.
I find personally that horses are maybe like the most intimidating subject. Like I find for me, like I'm not like scared to draw something usually, but a horse, I would be really embarrassed to put a horse in a book.
This makes me feel like a dick because I'm like, I don't care at all. Like I love drawing horses.
You're good with animals,
and I think, yes, that's true. But even when I was a kid, I remember when I was like very young and doing like babies' first art classes and stuff that I drew horses a lot.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like particularly into horses as a child.
There were
But
a
I think
lot
I
of
was just
horse
like,
art
that's
books,
fine.
I think.
Yes.
Did you? Because I had a bunch around my house too.
I think, it's like challenge mode for
Yeah, yeah.
artists. And I love animal anatomy and the way that horses fit together is very interesting. So I think
Yeah.
that is intimidating because it's so weird. But if you are just into that, maybe it's like a little less, I don't know. Because I can't claim that I'm doing it well. I just don't mind doing it.
Yeah, and like the horse as an idea is such a part of like American lore. Like there's so many cowboy movies and so many like paintings of like westernization, like horse. I was just at the Clark Museum, which is in upstate New York, and there's a lot of horse imagery there.
I gotta get to the Clark.
you
That
haven't
sounds
been?
great. No, I actually haven't been.
Shit.
Very
Yeah,
sad.
It's great. There's some great horses there.
I cannot wait.
And some Winslow Homer, which Maurice Sendak, he loves Winslow Homer. He talks about him a bunch. Okay, so we'll go. So, of course, then there's after we get a look at the Where the Wild Horses Are dummy, which is, like you said, a very narrow strip. Then he shows us the second draft, which becomes the dummy for the actual Where the Wild Things Are, which was very cool to see.
Again, also
That thing's
very
gotta be worth
tiny.
$10 billion.
Yeah, and it's adorable. He flips through that one, and it's like more book-shaped. It's not a strip, but it's still very small.
Yeah.
Like, hold it in, like, your index finger and your thumb kind of small. And he flips through it, and he's like, oh, it's much closer to the actual book. And I'm like, oh, my God, it is. It's, like, really, really well rendered and colored thumbnails pretty close to the actual final book illustrations in this tiny little thing. And
Yeah.
It's just like, honestly, I feel a little less stressed looking at that because I'm like, oh, you can make a book that small and it can be the prototype for a real book.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think it's a case of like you got to work out the flow of it, having it be a book. I think it's so important to like be able to turn the pages and look at it in that way. Because I remember making, just for fun, even as a kid, like a lot of little mock-up tiny books. It just was like, it's a cool format to play with. Because it's your closest thing to animation before you have the actual tools in any way, right? Like it's like the turn of a page is kind of a flip of a cell, right?
And kids are always trying to get closer to the real thing. Like, when you're creative, you're like, oh, this is practically a book.
Yeah.
I'm so amazing.
He has some great quotes, even at that age. So in 1965, Where the Wild Things Are is his first story and pictures by book. Before that, he was illustrating a lot of work by, I can't remember her name, Ruth somebody.
Krause.
Was it Krause? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seemed to be a lot of her work and
Yeah.
a bunch of other random things that he was kind of just dropping in, like adaptations of, I don't know if he does Grimm exactly, but like some fairy tale-ish
He
stuff
did.
in the mix.
Maybe we'll talk about that one because like in his later years, he did a series of books that were incredibly dark and bleak and kind of creepy.
Yeah.
And one of them was this. It was a letter, like a story in the form of a letter. I don't quite know the full backstory, but that Grimm, somebody had read or written, and then like it had been lost, and it was like recently discovered, and then Maurice Sendak illustrated it, and it's a kind of a fucked up book, honestly. Still kids format, like just illustrated picture book, but it's very dark and like they die at the end. The girl and the mom that are the story about are just dead at the end of the book, and you're like, oh,
Okay.
so that's where his stuff goes.
Right, yeah. Once you do
Later
80
on.
books and you're who you are, like you're just like it's just whatever you want it
Well,
to
this
be.
is what I find Maurice Sendak very interesting, not only because I did naturally just really love his stuff. Like Where the Wild Things Are was such a me book, if I can say that, because I'm like, yeah, I want to like go to the island and play around with the monsters. Like that was super appealing to me.
Yeah.
But also like he has such a like preoccupation with death, especially later. And like you can in this book, that's why I think this is one of my favorite art books, I think, because it's a friend writing it, and it's full of a lot of sort of like personal reference points and things that maybe you wouldn't get in other. It just feels a little bit more like, oh, this is actually like what Maurice Sendak was thinking and feeling, whatever, or saying to people at the time. And the guy thought about death all the time. Like he was very stressed. And I'm like, yes. I wouldn't even say I can understand it to the same degree. Because there's a lot of stuff, not to go completely hardcore so early, but again, like the Holocaust shows up a lot in his work. Not only in his kids' books, but also like in his opera, the stuff he was doing, which I still don't know a ton about. It's been a while since I've read this book fully through. Mm-hmm. But he did a lot of work with that, and it's like that's heavier than I can really wrap my head around as a person in the world. But like when he talks about just like his feelings about life, I don't know. Like maybe not all artists can relate to this, but I do feel like a lot of us are just like, oh yeah, like shit is pretty messed up, actually. And I'm kind of aware of that. And that's sort of what made his book so interesting, was that that showed up even in his books that are like, oh, this is for kids. But you're kind of like, what is going on? Like, is something bad happening? And like, maybe, yeah.
I think there just weren't as many, categories to put a career path in as much. It's like an artist could be a little more well-rounded topically because there wasn't such a breakdown in the publishing as like, here's all the categories of where kids' books go. Like at the time when Where the Wild Things Are came out, he notes, looking back, that there wasn't a book where a boy yells at his mom, and there's a book, in America at least, in a book with ugly monsters. He made those 2 points, and now it's like, there's probably not a lot of still today books where kids yell at their mom, but there's plenty of monsters and stuff. But I think he was just kind of making his own path because there wasn't a lot of paths for an editor to like kind of skew him into. And so suddenly you're just like, oh, this story is actually about this, and you didn't even know it until like years later. He makes this great point in a Charlie Rose interview from '93. And I think this kind of speaks to like what you're saying about getting those themes in like a kid's book. He notes that like social parodies, when they become meaningless, get dumped in the nursery in general. And but he like has this aspiration of adding like higher stakes for kids' work, because it's like, you know, there's plenty of great simple kids books like a Harold and the Purple Crayon, or any sort of like book about a cute bunny that, not the Velveteen Rabbit, that's very meaningful, but like other cute bunnies that do simple things, and it's just sort of a day in the life of type of thing. But his stuff like always reverberates with something historic, or like an art form that's sort of like fallen out of favor, and there's just like meaning in it.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, you could just feel like the emotions. It just feels so cheesy to say. Like, I feel like you just cannot convey whatever that sensibility is, but it is that. And even, I always sort of found his art style kind of unnerving as a kid, which didn't put me off of it, you know? And like, there's just something about it with this very, very pared back level of text and Where the Wild Things Are, for example. Like, it's not super text heavy. It's very, very short snippets of text. And just like, this kid is having like loneliness and like yearnings for the comfort of home, but also paired with like the angst of being a child with a lot of energy and like a really active imagination. It's just like more complex than it almost has any right to be, you would think.
Right. Yeah, I feel a lot of projects that feel like this, they usually come from a creative in an early stage of their process where they're really just figuring out essentially what's them. Oh, he says this great line in that 65 documentary. He says, it's something like having a career. What is it? The art of growing up into oneself. I don't remember the phrase that comes right before that, but I just like love that idea of you find out early on, maybe, hopefully, if you're lucky, what you kind of want to do. And then the rest of your journey is like trying to say that right. Yeah. And it's like, you can feel that in Where the Wild Things Are. It's like, he is trying to talk about something and he's upset about it. And he feels like this hasn't been said before. In the book, you might not get exactly it, but you can tell he's going for something. Yeah. Like really working. And he's going to keep working, because the next book goes a little further. They're all stories about like strange, odd places that are hard to get to, like at night, usually, right? It's just like a kind of a theme that he keeps iterating on, which is really cool. And I feel like that's relatable. Yeah, like, go towards the darkness.
There, I think it's Outside Over There is the name of this other book that he did later on, one of the darker ones. That, like, the art for this book is kind of horrifying. And you just look it up if you haven't seen it. Outside Over There. And it's about this girl and her, like, baby sister. It's honest. I'm like, did Labyrinth steal the plot from this book? I don't know. I didn't get that far to researching it, but there's a baby and it gets snatched by goblins out the window, and then the sister like has to go save her. I mean, not that book ends on a melancholy note where the sister kind of goes out on this whirlwind adventure, chases off these goblins that have stolen this baby, gets the baby safe back home. But the whole undercurrent of the story is that their father is like away at sea, and at the end he's still gone, and they don't know when he's coming home. Like, it's that almost, it's like, whoa, like, why are we talking about that? But and the older sister is like, and I'm gonna like take care of my sister and my mom like while he's gone, and it's like he'll be back one day. Like, that's all it says about that. And it's very vague, and then it's just sort of over. But I thought it was really interesting that Maurice Sendak apparently had a really intense, preoccupation, I'll probably say that a lot in this episode, with the Charles Lindbergh baby getting kidnapped. The kidnapping of the Charles Lindbergh baby happened when he was like 4 years old, I think. And I think that scared the shit out of him when he was like an actual toddler child. And then it was like one of those things that like scarred him as a child. And that book, like decades later, was fueled by that. And like, you can tell with his books, like he was a scared kid, which I totally relate to, because I was like that, just like very neurotic about things, like sense of dread for no reason, change very scary, etc. Like a lot of stuff. And it was just so interesting to be like, okay, like you had a lot of feelings from a very early age, and you're still riding that, right? Fueling that. And honestly, I think that's the best stuff for a kid's book, because that's that is why kids are like, oh, like, just, I'm absorbed in this because, like, I get it. And I don't have I can't articulate what this is and I don't know about it. So, like, I see you kind of a thing.
Oh, yeah, totally. He has a good way for, like a childless man who really championed taking kids seriously, like emotionally, because he talks about how adults have no tolerance for nonsense, whereas like a kid is more open to like wherever a story might go, and it can be ambiguous. And like you were saying, a lot of the stuff is kind of ambiguous. And adults, if you want to like bad Goodreads rating, like leave your ending ambiguous, because like suddenly your book is like of a 1-star value, right?
I need closure.
No personal agenda towards that, apparently, for me, but
we'll talk about it later. I need names.
But it's just like I think he knows that it's important to just create a sense of curiosity, give a lot of interesting things to look at, and then just let them have that, and that's like enough, right?
Yes,
for a kid.
Yeah, I think you don't. Isn't that what we've said on this podcast before? I think that like the best art is one that doesn't spell it all out for you. So maybe there's a fine line you have to walk where you can't just like end the thing with no ending.
Yeah.
But I think things are more interesting and more fun for everybody when you get to fill in the pieces. Mm-hmm. And so like these are vibe books. We talk about vibe a lot here on the show, but some of them are that where some of whatever he's doing, I don't know what it is, but you can't look at the book necessarily and be like, that's why it was so good. Like, because they took the ring to Mordor and they, like, touchdown slammed it into the, whatever. No, it's not like that.
Right.
There's just something about it that it is captivating on an emotional level that isn't always clear. And that is kind of badass, I guess.
Yeah. So he brings a lot of similar interest to like what an animator would bring to the table with his work. Because like, well, first of all, if you just look at where the wild things are, when he talks about laying out a book and the way it should flow from page to page and stuff, he describes it as he wants his drawings to feel free of the page, which I think is very lovely. Like, and when you read where the wild things are, it pulls you through because it's almost like one big long scrolling image, and the body language of the characters keeps building across a page, right? Like, so when you look at the monsters, they're all in like a different pose of swinging across a 2-page spread, right? Or when you look at Max, he's always mid-action. And then on the next page, he's kind of in like what the next logical pose would be. Like, it feels very animated. I think that's like all super intentional. And also, I remember looking at these books when I was a kid and feeling like they feel so theatrical, like there's like a flatness, like a stage design.
Yeah.
I didn't really know about his general like passion for opera and like the performing arts, but like it makes so much sense when you see this because it looks like it could instantly just be a stage set.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of his stuff does look like that.
Yeah.
A lot of it is very like 2D side scrolling, which is, maybe that's common and I'm just ascribing that to just only this because of that. But even like the cover of this book, which you can't see and which I don't know what this is from, but the cover of the art of Maurice Sendak has all of that energy, has big like stage layout energy with characters like tucked away in different places, but all like very viewable from a front on perspective.
Right.
Because I had no idea that until I read this book that he had this whole career in set design. But it totally suits his sensibilities. And that reminds me, I was like, what was that thing that he'd said about comics in one of the videos that we were watching? He's talking about In the Night Kitchen and talking about like how the same thing you were talking about, flowing, like the images like kind of animating across the page, and he specifically talks about it like it's a comic book.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, like it is that. So anyway, it can totally be on this podcast because comic books count.
Yeah, there's actual frames like across the page.
Well, yeah, and that makes that book so fun because I'll be honest, y'all throw this out. Like, I think the way he draws people kind of like puts me off a lot of the time. I don't really like it, but I mean, I don't dislike it either. whatever that sensation is. I don't really know. Like, and a lot of in the Night Kitchen is very like, everything is like doughy, which totally makes sense when you think about how much dough and baking is involved in the narrative of that book. But I was always kind of like, ew, like, why is everything so fluffy like that? But it's just such a delight to read it and to look at it, because it's just like, it does feel very like Winsor McCay to me.
Yeah.
It's very dreamlike and fun and weird, and the character's just like, I'm here in this panel, and I'm down here, like, and I'm like bouncing around. I'm like, oh, he's going. Like, I can see it happening.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like there's an awareness of like the layout of the book. Like, it's kind of meta. Winsor McCay would do that too. There'd be a panel where a kid sneezes, and the next panel, the panel is broken.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, did you ever think about frames?
Comics, man.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Like, there's a little bit of that sort of experimentation going on with him. Boy, so many like topics to cover. I guess we'll just, I think once we get into the story and like some of the tropes that influence other cartoon stuff we love, we're going to get stuck there. So I want to talk about his life just a little more. Back to the studio. Okay, this is, I want to know this stuff from you. He has a talisman pegboard that he points out.
Yes.
And that has a bunch of like random shit on it. And sometimes when we have a guest on, you can see like in the back of their Zoom, like some of their stuff. And I always want to like, how about for an hour, just tell us about your stuff. I just want to know.
Where did you get every item?
Yeah.
Yes.
So he points to a couple random things and moves on pretty quick. There's a like a triceratops that his nephew made.
I believe it's a brontosaurus.
Oh, is it? Okay. Some ambiguous dinosaur.
It's very unclear looking at it what it is.
And he describes it, it's like sitting on a shelf, and if he touches it, it's going to fall apart, which is perfect. What else does he have back there? Well, then he gets into the toys by his brother. I think he has maybe some William Blake. He has some postcards.
Yeah, his artwork pinned up, like little pieces of art. And he has these toys that he bought somewhere in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe in Germany. These little, like, wooden toys. One's like a fox, just carved. And they're on the pegboard on, like, a little shelf.
Yeah.
It's really cute. And he's just, like, they're wonderful. Like, you can tell that he just loves them.
Yeah, his interests kind of, like, span. Like, you listen to him talk, and he's quite serious, and you're like, oh, this guy really knows opera. I'm sweating just, like, hoping he doesn't ask me a question. But then he loves Mickey Mouse, and he loves, like, a goofy little toy.
Yeah.
He probably also loves Goofy.
That's why, honestly, I like, as soon as I saw the Mickeys, I was like, oh my God, like,
yeah,
I love you.
It's all
You're
just
amazing.
one. Yeah, it's all one big thing.
Yeah, right? And sometimes, I'll be honest, I'm sure nobody listening will agree because we're all that person, but sometimes I'm like, is it kitschy that I'm like into Disney stuff? Like, should I be ashamed of my artist cred for like being super inspired by this as a kid? And it's like, no, it's actually cool. Maurice is into it. My uncle, Mr. Sendak, blood relation. No, we're not related. He loves Mickey Mouse, so it's fine for me.
I would distinguish it as interests are cool. Sometimes, like, extremes of fandom are not cool.
Yes.
Like, if you're using it to try to just, like, put an outfit on and, like, get people to want to talk to you, I find that quite uninteresting. But if you actually know about whatever, I would love to hear somebody talk about, you know, Disney or any topic
almost
they
anything.
love, right? Like, interest is cool. So, all right, I'll do some of my talismans first, and then you can think of some.
This is
because
easier
we're in
for
my
you because
studio
we're in
right
your
now.
talisman zone.
But you have some iconic stuff that I could even think of. I'll just pick a couple random things. Of course, I have a bunch of cute little thank you cards from random students throughout my life.
On your pegboard, I will say, which is not a pegboard, but a corkboard in this instance, the modern day pegboard.
Yeah.
So, yes, I also have one.
So on the corkboard, you know what I have? A little poem, a little Halloween poem. It's the orange piece of paper there with the little drawing. That was made by my godmother, Dorothy, who my dog's name Dottie is after her.
That's so cute.
But her inking style, like, she was a great illustrator. She was like a scientist, so she wasn't like in the art field. But she would draw and write like great little poems. And her and my mom, when they were younger,
so she was
would,
a
like,
badass.
Yeah, she was very cool. She's like an icon for me. But that's one of her little poems, and a bunch of other random things, like little postcards I've made for projects of mine, some shell things. My mom loves wrapping stones, so like every birthday or holiday, I get a lot of wrapped stones, and they end up everywhere because you can't ever throw them out. Like, there's another one from Christmas. And driftwood. She wraps driftwood also.
Wow.
So those are almost
that
like
also
real
is
talismans.
cool.
And then I have my Disney World like flower lace from what is it? Which hotel would have that? I can't remember.
Frick, I know which one it is. We all know.
Yeah. Whichever,
the Polynesian.
Like, the Polynesian. Yeah.
Naturally.
Anyway, so cultured.
We've lost some cred.
And then I have a giant shark costume in the corner of the room.
That I don't understand. I wonder where that could have come from. So weird.
All right, what do you have around?
I'm curious. What's one that you can think of, an iconic item?
Well, I feel like you have a brassy collection of little
Oh, I
brass
absolutely
figurines.
do. Yes.
Kind of, anytime there's a mantle in your home or a shelf, with
It's
little
gotten
openness.
worse too since the one time you've been over. I have accumulated more of them. Honestly, I think so yes, I have a large collection of brass animals that I've mostly bought from the internet, and I love them. My excuse to start buying them initially was that I was going to use them as centerpieces on tables at my wedding, which was canceled due to COVID, and we never had it. So then I just kept doing it because secretly I just wanted to have them.
That's okay.
I think that comes from, like, my house was full of brass stuff growing up that my parents, because my dad was in the Air Force for like 20 years. So, I mean, we had a lot of Turkish furniture and like Turkish brass stuff in our house. And they still do.
Yeah.
But for I just love that. I don't know. I find it comforting.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I gravitate towards that. And I'm very selective about which brass animals I pick also. So you can't just give me any old one. Like, there's an aesthetic, there's a vibe. I don't know. It's impossible to put into words.
Yeah.
So some items I've spent too much money on, and I don't regret it. And I'd do it again.
Don't you have a corkboard also? I remember in your old
Yes.
apartment when we would record on Zoom, there'd be a corkboard and they'd have like work from friends.
So I love that because when I saw Maurice Sendak's pegboard, I was like, we're the same. Like, we have so much in common, sir. Dear Maurice, I deliberately bought a corkboard for my office because I wanted to pin up all the stuff that I accumulated over the year. So if I go to a museum and they give you a wristband or a sticker, I'll put it on the corkboard.
Yeah.
And at the end of the year, I'll take it all off and I'll put it in a folder, like with the date on it. So like if I get really nice notes, like I've gotten really, lovely letters from friends or coworkers, and I'll pin those up in a row at the bottom, and I'll keep those. Because at some point it occurred to me that it really sucks that for so long I was just throwing away cards that people gave me. Even if I liked them a lot, I'm like, I don't have anywhere to put this. And I'm like, no, I'm going to start hoarding these for my old age. So when I can be like, oh, do you remember what? But there are also like art pieces on there that don't ever come off. And I guess at some point I'm going to have to figure out what to do when I fully coat the whole thing.
Oh, it just becomes a final piece. Like the work is done.
Like, I'm not a pin person generally, but I have gotten pins as gifts that I really like, or just occasionally I'll see one I love, and I have a corner that's slowly spreading on the corkboard where I keep all those pins.
Yeah.
So eventually it'll be overtaken. I have coworkers' art that I've got pinned up there. So yeah, it's just a whole thing that I never want to stay the same. I want it to always be just what did I do this year? What's going on? You
don't want it to stay the same, but you also don't want to throw it out.
Yes,
right?
And I never will. And and that's why some of it does stay.
Yeah.
Some of it, I have my I was vaccinated stickers on there still. I'm
they're like little timestamps.
Yeah.
I feel I think that's why I love art interviews, because that's the biz I care about. But listening to artists, their sentimentality about stuff, nobody's space looks like an artist's space.
No,
you know what I mean?
Because we are cooler than regular people.
Yeah. Or we just have the need to be reminded.
Oh, we're like crows. We just let me accumulate. You know, in Howl's Moving Castle, when you go into Howl's room and it's a fucking absurd rat's nest of shiny shit.
Right.
That's the energy that all artists are bringing to their space, where they're let me just nest in my collection of items.
Right. Yeah, it's I don't have an answer to why, but okay. I have a thought, but if I say it, it'll open a door to somewhere we don't.
You have to do it now. My God, that's the opening to a novel.
Yeah, but I want to talk. There's so many other Maurice Sendak. Okay, I'll just say this. This is a time where there's a lot of discussion around the authenticity of the artist, because like AI slowly encroaches on the biz, right? See, I told you didn't want.
You're right.
I'm going to try to rope
foolish.
it in
Yeah.
But all I'm saying in that realm is, I think if you don't have that creative passion, that need to like represent feelings and emotions and capture the vibe of like a thing you had as a kid or something that can be important, and try to bring it to life through your work, like create the illusion of life, make the drawing fly off the page, whatever magic you want to do with your work, you'll never understand the difference between like why a computer generated thing can't be the same as like the thing somebody made, because it just comes down to there's no story behind it.
Yeah,
right?
and it sucks.
That's the end of it, right? And I think the conversation will always continue, because you either understand that or you don't.
Yeah.
And some people will think they can generate art in one way or the other, but if there's no story behind it, it's just not.
When it sucks, like we'll have to try to manually stop this train now that it's going, because but yeah, there's like there's so much garbage imagery that we're gonna have to deal with now, which sucks. And like, no offense, I guess, but it sucks, and I don't want a giant pile of trash. I want like nice stuff that people made with intention and care. I want good stuff that doesn't suck. I don't want a bunch of things. I actually would like less things, like I'd like fewer things to look at and to think about and to meditate upon. And like none of that stuff is worth anybody's time. Goodbye. I
think that's why it's easy for like on episodes where we try to address something new, something that is yet to like really create a place for itself in culture. It gets really hard to want to really care enough to have a conversation like this. But like, my Where the Wild Things Are book that you can hear that I've had since 1991, this is a real thing that is important to me. And it's important in a way because I know a lot of other people have it. And it's sad to think that stuff like this can be diminished by other people just trying to make things as quickly as possible to sit in that space in some way. And then the good ones get lost. And that's just a bummer.
Yeah,
but like,
he would have hated AI art.
Yeah.
You can tell. You could just tell by his sensibility. And there are quotes in here where he literally self-describes as like having a Luddite kind of sensibility.
Yeah.
Where he loves, and I feel this way. And I guess like, I don't know, in creative work, you're sort of made to feel like you have to apologize for like wanting to do things in a caring and intentional and like labor intensive way that is quality. But, people just want you to churn shit out magically and just like poop it out, no problem. And that sucks. And like to read him talking about how he really likes the old school way of doing things, I'm like, yeah, I get it. And I don't think that nobody should have to apologize for that to a certain degree. Like, oh, you're a Luddite, like whatever. You don't want to face technology. And it's like, actually just like being a human person. And this is like a very human thing to do.
Yeah.
Like we have a drive to do this. People draw for a reason. I wasn't like trained to do it. And otherwise I hate it. Like it's very natural. So like, why try to fuck it up? It's like trying to get everybody to eat Soylent instead of like eating food.
Yeah.
And like, what is the point anymore?
Right. What's the end goal here? Why make this efficient? Like, just these basic like human needs.
Sucks. Yeah. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. He makes in one of the interviews, I feel like this kind of is in the same category here. People always wanted a sequel to Where the Wild Things Are. Like, obviously, the publisher
Where the Wild Things Were.
He hates that idea in his interview so much. Like, the idea of, like, the crassness of creating a sequel. It's so kind of old-fashioned in a way, because now, like, I think in a lot of ways, we've actually figured out maybe ways to do sequels in some ways, but at least at that time in the 80s when he was being interviewed, and in some ways I agree, like the idea of making a sequel to something, it's sort of giving up an ideal that you had in some way. I don't know.
Well, and it's like, what are you going to do? Turn this into the Where the Wild Things Are cinematic universe?
Well, exactly. Because like, what does it become?
Is it going to... Then you have to explain things.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally gets sent to his room and then morphs like magically the whole world around him turns into an ocean and forest and he rides a boat for a year. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You don't want to have the sequel and be like, oh, and then it happened again. And here's the mechanics of how it works. Like, that's boring.
Because you know what it becomes is a story of the mechanics.
Yeah.
Of how it works. It's not about like a distraught child or like that feeling. Now it's just about how the world works.
It's almost like the Chronicles of Narnia. Like, if you're reading those books at a certain point, they're like, and now it's about other kids. Because you can't keep talking about the same kids over and over again without, and like that, those books already have mechanical problems.
Yeah.
But even then, like, that's not what it's about. So you have to not talk about it.
Yeah.
You can't be like, even though they kind of explain how the wardrobe gets born. Whatever. I'm not saying it's a perfect example. Yeah,
like that style of conversation is like kind of, it's just it can be fun to say it, but it's like not really interesting.
It is the kind of stuff. Oh my God, I might be about to say something mean. So if so, maybe cut it out. If it's like too much, we'll talk about it. I don't know. But it's like, I think this is a great thing. So I'm not trying to knock this, but if you go onto any Reddit of anything you liked, it is full of people being like, here's what should have happened. Here's what I think happened.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm really sure happened despite all of the text and the subtext of the piece, whatever. Mm-hmm. People love to engage with art in that way. I think there's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of those people are not creatives.
Right.
Like, a lot of those people
just
are fans. You know, just like people living their lives, like being in the world. And like, that's what you get. I don't want me to be making those things. Like, a lot of those ideas don't work in practicality, you know? So it's like, it's great for discussion.
Right.
But it is not actually something that should be made.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think just watching Maurice Sendak's face like change as someone brings up the idea, because I'm sure he's done so many interviews, you can see him go dead a little bit just when somebody brings up where the wild things are, because it's like, I'm going to talk about my first book for the rest of my life. I could make 80,000 books.
I killed a kid in one of these books, okay? We still have to talk about this?
Like, that's kind of a tragic truth of somebody like him. It's like, he's still the Where the Wild Things Are guy, even though he has like so much great work. But that the resistance to want to give people what they think they want, it's like that. I feel like sometimes now that seems like a mean thing to do, because there's so much of the way the economics of media work. It's like, well, we have to give fans a bit of what they want, because then they give us back their value, so we can keep pushing it a little more, ideally. But in a way, we still got to give them like this glad-handing relationship. I could see like being an artist, and if you're a Maurice Sendak and you don't really have an obligation for that, just be like, fuck no. You're never going to get the thing you think you want. You're going to get what I think you want, because that's why you loved me in the first place, right? Like,
God, that's so powerful.
It's just like, it just feels good and you can just feel that in him. I feel like that's part of what comes across as like maybe the meanness or whatever of somebody. He's doing the thing. Leave him alone. Yeah,
he feels like very cantankerous, and I'm like, yes, he's right. Everything he says is correct, and I agree with him. His whole energy is that.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, he's just tense. Like, you can tell in any of the videos that we saw, no matter what time period. Like, there's a tension, and I get it.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many reasons why that makes sense. And also, like, get off his jock. Like, leave him alone.
Did you watch the Charlie Rose one from 93?
No.
Okay, where they're sitting, like, at the table, and he's got, I can't remember what book had just come out. It was something where it was an adaptation of two poems that he jammed together that are just juxtaposed.
Down in the Dumps with something and something.
Yeah.
I don't remember the names.
Yeah, it's from, like, the...
Yeah, I read about it also in this book. Highly recommend The Art of Maurice Sendak, 1980 to the present.
So he gets to this point in the conversation, and at this point, he had kind of jumped out of children's books to working in opera. And Charlie Rose gets him talking about like his early passions with art, and he just poses this kind of annoying question. It's like, if you could have exactly the life you wanted, what would you want? And he just says very quickly, like, to be a musician. Like,
Aww.
it's interesting. Some of these people that we are like, I want to be like them. I want that career. They don't even want really that career. Like, he talks about drawing and making books as like the job he fell into, and then got lucky enough where he could just keep doing it. And he just rode that wave really well. But all along, he kind of wished he had some musical talent that for some reason he didn't pursue. And the closest he could get was like designing sets and being part of like the opera.
I think that's beautiful. I actually think that's such a wonderful thought because I think it's in maybe one of the interviews from the 80s. He's like going around a studio talking about stuff, and he's like, and here's my like record player, and I can't live without this. I have to have this. Like, and I was like, oh my God, like I get it. We are the same, because he's like, I have to have exactly the right thing playing to like captivate the mood or whatever. And I'm like, same. I remember reading in, maybe it was like Animator Survival Kit. I can't quite remember. There's one Animator classic text where it has this like funny caricature of one of the 9 old men like screaming at somebody for playing music while he's animating, and like you have to have it like it has to be silent. So you like what? I'm like, that's fucking stupid. Like that's dumb, and like not everybody works that way. And Maurice Sendak is just like, I have to listen to like Wagner, like Haydn or whatever, any of these like particular things because of like the color of what they're playing. He says that a lot.
The color of it.
Yeah, and he says that in reference to like poetry and just different art. Yeah. And I'm like, yes, because like you're just somebody who like holistically is fully into the art and like the creative space, and you're like fueling your own stuff with that way. Yeah. So like maybe you have this like fantasy and this desire to be a musician, but like you have this very deep love and appreciation of music that boosts everything that you do. Yeah,
he's kind of right. He's getting the same value in a way that a musician might. Like it's encouraging his creativity, like the form itself.
Yeah, it's like you're not a musician, but like you have, like it's not like music is not a fundamental element to who you are.
Right, like Where the Wild Things Are is literally a dance. I mean, the characters, there's like an arc throughout the book of that. There's like less motion, and then it builds, and then they're all in full motion, and then they kind of like come down from that.
Classic Rumpus.
Yeah, and it just is so, you could almost, if you wanted to, you could be like, oh, I could pair every scene with a song. It just feels animated in that way, right? Like the way you're describing of like the thing that inspires the thing comes through in the work. And I love that it's like artists of that time, I think, being tied to, I don't know, some art movements, like painterly movements of the time, like in going back to the 40s and Fantasia and things, where color is so much part of the language, just in an extremely abstract way. It's like, here's some color forms moving around the screen, and here's a great song. That's all you need right now. And your imagination can do the rest. Like he knows that a kid needs like more specifics, but I think in his brain, I could picture it being like that. It's like shapes of color moving, and then it becomes something a little more like tangible, like a boat.
Is it fair to say that Maurice Sendak is Walt Disney if Walt Disney was like actually cool? Like actually a cool guy?
Yeah, I think the power, like the pursuit of Walt Disney did make him uncool at certain stages.
He's maniacal. Like he's megalo and otherwise maniacal. Right. And so like I have a great love and fondness for a lot of the stuff that he had a hand in, but like the man himself, thumbs down, don't want to hang out with them. Like, I don't think we'd get along. Right. And Maurice Sendak is like, has all the same like verve and originality and etc., but is like, shit is actually whack. Like, it's not cute.
Yeah. Like the same kind of respect for children, but he doesn't play it as safe. Like Walt Disney wanted like a safe fantasy world, and Maurice Sendak wants like a dangerous fantasy world.
Yeah, he was just like, I think his big deal was like, you can't lie to kids. Like stuff is bad. And that's why, which we haven't really talked about, and I don't have that much to really specifically reference, but with the Holocaust stuff, like it's something that he thought about a lot. I mean, he was Jewish, like his family was Jewish. And I think he wrestled with that to a certain degree, where it was like, I know that kids like died and all of this, like so many, and I feel like I have to be honest with kids about that. So like, where is the line? Because he's just not the type of person that's like, we're just gonna like shelter them to have like a lovely, cute fairy tale childhood for like as long as possible before they find out that it's really bad. Yeah. And I admire that personally. I think that is important. Like, I wonder what things maybe would be like if we just had those conversations more openly and were more realistic about it. Yeah. But it's also quite unnerving because it's in that Dear Millie book that is the adaptation of that Grimm letter that I was talking about earlier, where the girl passes away at the end. But there's a part where this girl spends all this time in the forest, and really she's essentially already dead, but that's just like part of the journey of the book. And there's a shot, like a double-page spread, where she's walking through the forest, and in the background there's this like group of children, and they look very freaky. And now I know that it's because they're based very directly on a photo of a group of kids that had a photo taken before they like went off to Auschwitz and died.
Yeah.
And it like, holy shit. And like, there's no reference to that. It doesn't say like asterisk, by the way, like here, this book is a message about that. But it's just like the stuff that he felt was important to include that he was thinking about. And it's haunting.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so fucking haunting. And I think that like, those aren't going to be his most famous books because they're not like marketable, in the same way. Like, this is dealing with a lot heavier subject matter. But I was like, that's what makes him such an amazing artist, was that he was just like, this is important and we should talk about it. I'm not going to pretend like it's not real. Like, you should read this book. Like, this is what I have to say. And I admire that so much. Like, it's not soft.
Right. It's like a more specific, like, a kid, like a general propulsion for a narrative about a kid is to be frightened of something. And usually in a more modern sense, or in an easier sense, that thing that is frightening is like abstracted through superheroes or some sort of mythological element that's like detached from the real world. But when you ground the scary thing in a way where it could be a person or like a piece of recent history, like, it becomes way scarier. Like, it's almost like another category of scare or like darkness.
Yeah, it's like we all know that it could really happen.
Right.
So it becomes it's not cute.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
So in Where the Wild Things Are, we have all the monsters, and we can talk about which monster designs we like best. But
I was going to ask you which one was your favorite.
Well, I want to stay on the story, the representation of like reality topic a little bit before we just look at the fun drawings. So Maurice Sendak, if you couldn't guess, the monsters are kind of just based on people in his life. So the idea with the book is that as a boy, his Jewish family would come to his small Brooklyn apartment and just kind of raid it. I don't remember which interview it was, but he describes kind of horrifically the arrival of all these like giant adults, and what they would do. They would come in, they would assault him with like affection.
Yeah, pinch his cheeks.
Yeah, they would have probably giant, massive coats, like big New York winter coats. They'd pinch his cheeks. He talks specifically about them eating his food and that really stressing him out. That feels like such that era of America, like post-depression type of war era thing, like being worried about food resources, just like fundamentally. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's just something, a point you don't see in kids' storytelling really anymore. And all these little ideas. And then when you look at the monsters, you're like, you can see that feeling you get when you see like a strange aunt or uncle when you're a kid and their makeup looks too thick, or like the creases in their face look unrealistic,
like
because you just don't understand
like mask-like
what an aged person looks like. And when you look at this book, you're like, yeah, it's just his family's over, and that's it. And that's exactly what the book feels like when you think about it.
Like,
maybe that's why it's relatable.
This is super fun. I gotta sail home. Bye.
Yeah,
This sucks.
Yeah. Like, imagine if you could sail away from like an uncomfortable family reunion.
That's what Enya wrote about.
That's actually what that song is about.
It's about Where the Wild Things
And the album art is her and all her family together.
We have our bits.
But, things like that, just the sort of fundamental feeling of being around figures that you don't know their history, and they're big and kind of dangerous feeling, and then having an opportunity to tame them. That's such a kid empowerment story that's like so essential. Okay, before we talk about Max or anything, is it time to talk which monsters are our favorite?
Yes, obviously.
Top 10 monsters.
How many are there, like, total? I'm not even sure.
I know. I'm trying to flip through. Like, let's see where we meet them. Well, first we meet. So, if you're
there's a sea
unfamiliar with the
monster
story,
that shows up just for a minute.
Max sails for a year across the ocean. Exactly 1 year. He arrives. There's a great sea monster. A real, like, edge of the earth, edge of the map.
Yeah, like, here there be.
Yeah. And he's got a great kind of, his hair, great fringe.
Yeah, is he like a little Bowie-esque? I don't know. There's something about him. And he's got like real like
wisp of
a chin beard.
So Max is kind of stressed out at first because he sees that monster and he's blowing a little bit of smoke. But that's okay, because now we're going to arrive at the island. Now we meet the first batch. So we get Nose horn, kind of, I don't know. You're better at describing things. Tell us about these monsters.
This is sort of like a rhinoceros lion. I would say this is definitely my top 3, not my number 1. Love this one though, and it has like long wavy hair.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
nice.
I look at this one and I'm like, aunt or uncle? Impossible to tell.
Right.
Not sure. With leaning towards aunt, can't possibly say. Getting ridden by a bipedal goat man.
I didn't really like the goat man because he's too small. He's too human-sized.
He's the smallest one. Yeah, it's very
kind of
strange. Maybe he's supposed to be like a nephew, like a cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Unclear. And then we have the second one who I remember most from the hereto not mentioned Spike Jones like CG.
The teeth. It's not a CG. Do you remember watching it? It's a lot of Jim Henson stuff.
Some of it, yeah, but like some of the facial stuff.
Oh,
like
yeah,
being
totally.
CG.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. I remember them having the big which I remember going to see, and I have no memory of any of the content of the
2009,
film. Whatever, absolutely, very late 2000s film, to be sure.
Real Karen O in the soundtrack.
Yes, oh my God. Honestly, like, curious how it holds up, but, like, lack the interest to investigate.
It's just totally different. It's, like, thematically, they're all sad.
It feels very, in my memory, which is blank, it's, like, very vague, mopey, like, oh, I'm, like, in my late 20s now, and I'm, like, not a kid anymore. Like, that kind of movie.
I have
Maybe
3
that's
Arcade
unfair.
Fire albums.
And, like, no one talks about that movie anymore, so...
No, it just fell out
thoughts.
of it. I love Spike Jonze, but that's, like, not really one that's important.
We'll do a bonus episode where we watch that.
It's got cool scenes.
Maybe we should.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
We both end up crying. But so this one, he's got like a furry round face and a striped body, upper body, but his lower half is all scaly.
He looks like a dude in a band. Like he's got the striped shirt on. He's got a lot of facial hair.
Yeah, he's wide. He's huggable.
He seems most like that's the toy you would buy.
Yes.
Right?
Like, there's a reason he became the mascot of that film,
Right.
I think. There's something about it. He has enough detail to him, because the other ones are all kind of one note. Like, we're 2 things mashed together. The one next to him has sort of like shoulder-length hair and duck feet, but otherwise just sort of like monster body. Like, just generic monster body.
Right. Okay, so on this page, we kind of were loving Horn Nose guy, and then, of course, the iconic striped sweater dude. Now, we got a couple more on this page, I believe.
Oh, the bull guy is really
let's
good.
skip because I think he showed... Yeah, here he is. Okay, now we have maybe these are the last 2 that you really need to know.
Yeah, number 1 is the bird head guy, honestly. I was like, what a
he's
unique dude. Love him. Really into the bird vibe. So he was my favorite for some reason as a kid. I distinctly remember that.
Yeah, I think I just loved birds in general as a kid. I had a parakeet.
Yes,
and he just,
same.
Right?
Another trait that all artists share. Owning a parakeet and enjoying birds.
And then you get kind of, the bull guy with the big spaced out square teeth.
Which I think it's impossible not to like the bull guy because he's on the cover and that's a very tender drawing.
Yeah. He's got sadder eyes.
Yeah.
With the brow. And then, and I think that's kind of it. I think we meet the group. Oh, no, that's not true. There's a couple big nose guys.
Yeah, they're
Noses
kind
are
of similar looking. There's a couple ones that show up that sort of all look the same a little bit to me.
Yeah. And they're just won over by this kid. And it's great, and they all take a nap. I love a book where characters take a nap.
Yes, so relatable. They're just like me.
Yeah. And then just the energy of the monsters is great because they are scary fundamentally because they come around him, they're won over because they believe he's the most dangerous, but then they're that's betrayed, and then they get mad again because they realize he's just like kind of a kid and they turn against him. So it's not like with the monsters, it's not really a happy, sentimental monster ending. I think the modern child wants the monsters all to be their friends. Like, these are not your friends, these monsters.
Yeah. Well, I will say, as a kid, I wanted them to remain friends. I was like, this is so fun. You're having a great time. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And then when they get mad again when he leaves, I'm like, that's a bummer.
No, exactly. That's what I mean.
Sucks.
It's like, you want him to stay.
Yeah.
And I think maybe at this point, when we were kids, were there stuffed versions of do you remember there being stuffed versions around? I've seen them. They're a little cuter than what the book portrays, but that's just going to happen.
I almost feel like it makes more sense in the original conception of them being wild horses too. That like they're not tamed. Like, they are wild. So you can't stay.
Yeah. Which that's true.
I
Yeah.
do think that's sort of ultimately what they're getting at in the story is like, this is fun for a while, but like this is not where you belong.
Right.
Like you're not actually one of these. Like you're a human person. You need to like be domesticated and go home.
Like you flare up for a moment and all seems lost, but the truth is like you love your mom and you should go home and shut up. Okay, a couple things.
Eat your soup, Max.
So there's something, a couple things, so many things. I'm just flipping at the pages. I'm like, let's just talk about this page for a while. Now the room, there's a feeling of this room and the way it transforms that echoes with other stories that I love that feel this way. And I was trying to think of them. There's a Ray Bradbury story. I can't remember what it's called. You might be familiar with the premise because I feel like they've adapted into things. It's kind of this vague future where kids' nurseries have like augmented reality walls where the kids can decide what the room is like.
Yeah.
And the parents like see the kids are always playing in this kind of jungle, like forest. I guess it's like, maybe it's a savanna setting with like lions and whatnot. And then it comes to life and kills the parents. The kids bring it to
Jumanji
life.
style.
Yeah, exactly. Jumanji is another one. Jumanji, another great picture book, like the best illustrations.
I did not know it was a picture book. Are you kidding?
You've never
Is
fucking
it? No,
seen
I didn't.
Jumanji? Holy
I've seen the
shit.
film with Robin
I'm going to go on
Williams.
Amazon right now and just buy it for you.
Hell yeah. I love
like,
free stuff.
I must have you know what? I gave my nephews.
Wow.
Jumanji.
How dare you have like children in your life?
You would fucking love it. It's the best.
You're probably right.
It doesn't feel like the movie at all. It's just like these amazing.
Sounds terrifying.
Yeah,
I'll
look
buy
it up later. You know what? I wouldn't even look up the images online. I would just buy it and only see it in the book first.
Okay.
Please. Okay.
Okay, I won't look it up.
Do me that one favor.
I promise.
It's a perfect book. So another one that fits in that category is. Did you ever read The Wizard of Earthsea?
Yes.
That's another like sailing to a thing and discovering like kind of like the id and the ego, like the essential
You're
thing.
sailing into yourself, and it's horrifying and upsetting and weird, but cool also.
There's something like the spirituality or like the feeling of that is so 60s, 70s, and that I think things are so much more on the surface now. There's not as much room for that journey.
That absolutely is.
You know what I mean?
Honestly, I didn't read those until I was a little bit older.
Yeah.
And like it's crazy how much like there's a lot of like women are like this, like da da da. But you can see her underneath the surface being like like, but actually I'm introducing my disruptive narrative to things. And it's so weird to see the layers, the depth of the layers in there.
Yeah.
Like it's a good book.
Yeah. So back into the room. So that's like, that was a tangent into the sea travel thing and discovering
the Earth
yourself.
Sea.
Yes. So back in the room, well, we have talked about like Velveteen Rabbit and some other children's stories, like when we did our Burrow episode, and this idea of like the space of a child and the imagination that comes about and the transformative nature of that can bring like toys to life. I bring this up because stories of toys are not our friend John Lasseter made. There's a short adaptation of Where the Wild Things Are that's like a test.
Yes.
Like a tech test at early Disney, I think in like 85 or something. Have you seen clips of that?
Yes, but it's been a long time since I've seen it. I'm going to pull it up now. But was it still when he was trying to like get them to do CG stuff?
I guess there you can see that it's shaded in a real Roger Rabbit type of way, like things are kind of rounded in an airbrushiness, and it's a lot of Max like running around the house being chased by the dog, like it's a lot sillier.
Sounds madcap.
Yeah, I mean the aesthetic does not resemble Maurice Sendak in any way. It's more of just, this is a story I love, like let me play in this world for a couple minutes. But it just seems like these type of children's books about a room coming to life, and whether it transforms the things in it, that's like essentially what Toy Story is. And I think that type of story had been lost just enough when Toy Story comes out. It brings that back for so many people. Not only is it a great thing, but I think for people that are a little older, like me, like I wasn't a kid when I saw Toy Story, but it did bring back the memory of like the tiny experiences that seem giant of a childhood bedroom, you know? And I hadn't really ever thought about that with Toy Story being a thing, but it just feels like this book. And once I saw that short, I'm like, oh, it's all kind of connected, just slightly. I don't know. Maybe that's not true.
gotta watch it now.
Oh, you're just actively watching
Moment
it.
of silence.
Can you turn it a little bit so I can see?
Wow.
Or is that
Yes, but
gonna
I
break
feel
the
like
Wi-Fi
this
connection?
this doesn't feel like it says
the
it's.
heck is
I don't
this?
know. Cut all this. It's garbage.
No, this isn't it. It's,
Okay, well, this is
I don't
bullshit.
think.
Is that it?
Oh, there it is. Okay, so we get like a real, I don't know what to describe him as, but we just see Max kind of jumping around his room as a wild thing. He's scrawling with marker on his wall, and we have like a 3D generated bedroom, and the camera is just swooping all over the place. So clearly it's just like a look at where we can put the camera type
Yes,
of
I can
thing,
see
right?
why, honestly, watching this, why John Lasseter was not treated with wide open arms and
Yeah.
stuff like this by Disney.
It's interesting because it's trying to do like single take stuff. Like it goes from the hallway, the camera backs down the hall and then flies down the stairs all in
Yeah,
one
like
shot.
rotating around to different perspectives. It's like it's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it really has nothing to do with the book.
It completely lacks
But-
any of the charm. The character designs are also subpar, if I
Ouch.
may be so bold as to say.
But you can feel, an artist like John Lasseter, some of these, I think the cool thing about picture book artists and like some of these artists that are in control of the whole process is you learn a lot more about the things that inspire them. Whereas when something scales up so much, it's kind of, you lose that story of
Yeah.
what got them there. It becomes a bit more about the tech or just the team.
Yeah.
But it's nice to think about where the Wild Things are inspiring like early Pixar. You know what? I also, on the Toy Story path, only because I've created it. Have you ever seen the Jim Henson? It's called like a Toys Story or something.
I don't think so.
It's not very Muppety, but it's a bedroom the night before Christmas, and all the toys come to life
Oh, I've
when the
heard
kids
about
leave
this.
the
Yeah,
room.
I have not seen it, but I have heard of it.
And the kids are stressed out because there's a new sci-fi toy under the tree, and they sneak down to
Weird.
see it, and they want to try to get rid of it.
How familiar.
Yeah, exactly. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, but this last Christmas we watched it, I'm like, oh, this is exactly
Yeah.
Toy Story.
Great
but
artists
scary
steal
because
blatantly.
The puppets are all really scary, and the lighting is weird. But anyway, I don't know if you had any other stories of childhood bedrooms that.
Well,
you
I'm
wanted to
trying
mention.
to think of like particular ones, and naturally I'm just blanking. Although I already mentioned Chronicles of Narnia, and I don't think it's exactly the same, but it sort of is
Yeah.
of a time because it's
It
kids who are
opens a
basically
portal.
bored in
Right.
a giant mansion that's not theirs. So, and they go looking for stuff. But I find it very interesting that a lot of like people in the last couple generations, potentially, if I'm not casting too wide a net, are very inspired by that exact thing. And it's like, is it because we're all bored kids? Like, is
Yeah.
that where a lot of fantasy comes from? And I kind of wonder
Yeah,
if it's
yeah.
like I lived, we moved around a lot as a kid, and I think that was great. But then like, in second grade, basically, we moved to Oklahoma, and we lived like 20 minutes outside of town, and it was the late 90s. Like, there was somewhat isolated in comparison to friends I had that lived in like walkable cities or,
Yeah.
Stuff like that. We spent a lot of time just like running around outside and just being alone outside and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, okay, is that why? Like, are you breeding like nerdy children when you do that? Because all we have is like the television and the book to tide us over. We like didn't really have good internet back then.
Yeah.
And I can't speak to how that's affecting us now because we don't have that. There's way more ways to like get connected
Right.
on the web and such. But maybe is that just like all of these children across the globe?
Yeah.
Like in Western society, at least. I don't know. If not, just absolutely globally. We're like, I'm bored. What if I walked into this wardrobe and I came outside and there was like stuff there?
Yeah.
Like, I don't
And
know.
it's a Christian allegory. I think the idea of projecting yourself into a space with the aid of like the stories you love that's just like narrative art always
Yeah.
everywhere, right? Because what else do you have? Like those are the resources. Like you're trapped in a room, you're able to kind of meditate, you have the things you know, and then you just sort of expand on that. You know who this book makes me think of painter-wise that's in that category of someone who didn't go anywhere? You know Henry Rousseau? You've definitely seen his
Yeah.
work. It's like flat in the same way. It's scenes of like jungle and whatnot. But he was a French painter from like, I don't know, the 19th century, late 19th century maybe. But he never left France. But he only painted like, all his paintings are like the tiger jumps on the antelope. It's like very literal.
Never even seen
And
a
that's what the
tiger.
painting is. Yeah. And they're all, he describes himself, he's like a naive painter, I think he describes himself. It's like primitive art, they say, but it's like the skill is great. Like he's a great, he picks great colors. Like the imagery is not technically accurate in some ways. Like it feels flat. The animals like can only turn in like 90
This
degree
guy's
angles.
never been to the jungle.
But there's something about like his use of negative space and composition that's very matured, but he's missing some things that you would learn in art school for sure. But it's just like, he's always someone I liked a lot because it kind of showed what you could do without knowing everything in a way. And I feel like that flatness is very like where the wild things are in a way. It's like, here's a world. It's just straight out of my imagination.
Yeah, it's contained.
Sorry.
This is not a real place.
Right. It's contained in the frame.
This feels like a bullshit tangent because I can't get into a lot of details yet, but I'm excited to talk to you about, we did a previous episode where I was grilling Ira about graphic novel stuff, and I might be working on something. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know.
Not even you know.
It's possible. But a lot of like the ideas I've gotten are literally from like walking around my neighborhood and seeing stuff. I don't live in a big neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's not a big one. But there are like locations and important objects that I'm like, this will be in it.
Yeah.
This is like a thing that I've spun out actual like lore and backstory from.
Yeah.
The most random bullshit just from like walking my dog through the woods by our house.
Yeah.
Like I've just seen cool stuff and I'm like, this could be that. This could be that thing that I blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe someday you'll know what I'm talking about, or it will come to nothing and I'll never tell. So
I think if it does that, these are the stories you'll tell, is like the
that
day
would
you
be-
walked by the thing with your dog, right?
yeah, when PBS comes to interview me in my home and I'm like wearing a like dark pink shirt in my like beautiful like red and brown studio and the aesthetic is just right. And I'm like, here are my favorite books.
Right.
Here are the woods that I walked through.
Here's my corkboard.
Yeah, here's my corkboard.
I think that story, like every book kind of needs a story of where it came from. Like Stephen King's It has a story of when he walked over a bridge and he thought about the three billy goats gruff. And he's like, what if a story about kids and there was like actually a monster under there? And that becomes like Pennywise.
What?
And then, did you know I met Eric Carle and spent a day with him? Have I ever told you that story? Okay.
I loved it.
He talks about the idea for the Very Hungry Caterpillar and just him and his dad walking behind their house in Syracuse. And it was like a rare thing before they moved back to Germany and like during the war and all this stuff. But it was like a serene moment. And that's what the point of view of the Very Hungry Caterpillar is. It's just like him as a kid with his dad and what he saw like that day.
That's really cute.
You know, but it's like that same thing that you're talking about, right? It's like the things you just see, they just become whatever you make.
Yeah. I get
in
this
some
is
way or
a
other.
gem of wisdom, I hope, or possibly total bullshit. But yeah, if you ever like read a book and you're like, "Wow, did they come up with that? Like, I can't even fathom it." It's like probably from some inexplicable nonsense that you would never associate in the real world because they're literally just like, "That could be something, huh?
Yeah,
Maybe that. I really like this thing. It could be this. Like, that's it."
yeah.
I don't want to simplify it so far, but sometimes it is not more complicated than that.
I can see like Maurice Sendak when he started designing this world. He's like, I'm going to make a space that I would just like love to be in.
Yeah.
Like it just feels loved. Like
I would. All the trees are
world.
like beautiful and like perfectly straight and like the same height but different foliage and colors. There's something about the room when it fully transforms that I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Because it feels fake and not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like too perfect.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's that Disney pursuit. It's like, you know what's better than the real world? I'll build. You know what's better than Main Street? The Main Street I make
USA.
you. Yeah. Like this is like a Disney forest in the way that what's the perfect version of a forest in the perfect day with the perfect amount of wind and the perfect amount of moonlight.
And the perfect monsters.
They are the perfect monsters. They're giving the boy their full attention. I was just, this was a while ago, but I was on a podcast talking about Coraline, and this is a story in that realm as well, where the lore of the danger is that it admires and loves the child protagonist, and that's what puts you in trouble. Like, the ego of the kid draws them into danger. And that's usually some of the best stories, I think. That's kind of, it's like, oh, you're in trouble because, like, you're getting their full attention, that monster's full attention. And
it's like, you should leave.
Can't help. Yeah, yeah.
This is not cool, actually.
But it's like so true, right? It's like whatever gives you the attention, you're kind of going to lean into it. Whatever it is, like...
Which is also, that's so fucked up, but, like, that is something that causes children and people in the world a great deal of harm.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to warn kids about.
Yeah.
It's like, it's actually not great if somebody's paying you a ton of attention and you're not really sure why.
Yeah.
Like, they might want to kill you. Like, you should leave.
Oh, you think these monsters are abusive in that kind of way? They could be.
I don't know. I don't know. There is certainly...
We don't want to put that on these
There's
guys.
a world in which maybe they eat him, right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And you know what? Maybe Max has it coming to him. We haven't really talked about Max.
Max is a little shit. I don't know. That's what I like that the angle that Max is like, he's a growing boy and you're experiencing a lot of stuff and like going through phases and maybe I like our puppy. Honestly, it reminds me of that where it's like 7 p.m. time to lose my freaking mind. And she just like goes insane for a while. And a kid, like it just happens. That's you got all this stuff going on, like lots of things churning through your whole situation. And I like the idea that he just is raging out one night and mom's like, just get out of here and like go to your crate, basically.
Yes, exactly.
And take a nap.
Right.
And then like
get out of my shit.
The story of him dealing with all the monsters is more like an internal like, I still have all this stuff happening though, like, but I'm in my room now. And then maybe you fall asleep and you wake up and you're fine.
Yeah, yeah.
That kind of a thing. Like anytime I got upset as a kid, I'd like cry and like be super pissed off or whatever. And then I would like take a nap. And I would feel so much better after. Yeah. So that's also a read on this is like, they're not going to eat him, you know, whatever. It's more of like, I'm like coming to terms with being a human person and I have stuff that I can't control. Like when our puppy freaks out, you can tell that she just has no control over her physicality.
Right.
She's just losing it.
Yeah. There's Maurice Sendak describes in one of the interviews, he said the story of the book actually only takes place over like 2 seconds.
That makes perfect sense.
It kind
to
of
me.
does. It's
yeah.
like he gets mad, it's resolved, and it's dinner time. And it's like
well, and the soup is still hot. So that's like
exactly.
I love the idea that he falls asleep and she just
Right.
like, here's your dinner, you little wretch. Like, you know, eat up, idiot. I should never have had. No, she never did that. Maybe I don't know, but it's fleeting. And I think also that when it's like he sails away and it's like a year, that's such a like to kids everything is forever.
Right.
I remember as a child in like the mid 90s being told I had to wait 4 hours before I could like hang out with my friend. And I was like, this is an eternity. Like I remember as a kid being like, 4 hours? Like that is an obscene amount of time. And now I'm like, whatever, that's fine. I'll clean.
Yeah.
It's literally nothing. Like it's not a big deal. But to a kid, you get sent to your room like that your life is over.
It's true. Because your life is so little, like it could just be over.
You have no frame of reference.
Yeah. I think that I find as I get older, I appreciate more this like unseen skill in a lot of narrative art that's the mastery of time, the use of time in story. Like I think maybe the thing that makes this, obviously the drawings and whatever, but everybody's talked about that. But the way it's like, the story is 2 seconds, but it's also a year, depending on like the perspective. And you jump in and out of that. And that feeling, I think, captures your imagination that in a way that like brings it all to life and makes you just sort of think about how 2 seconds can feel like a year. And what does that year look like when it's actually in 2 seconds? Like that is just really interesting to me. Because when you tell a story, these are the choices you always have to make. And I find with people that are editing my work, not necessarily like my main editor, but when I get comments, side comments of people that are looking at chapters or sections of my stuff, they're most critical when they're seeing less of the work because they're like, oh, I feel like the way that character says that, it's a little too mean.
So annoying.
And I'm like, yes, it is mean. But if we look at the story, they have to get there because when they come back from that, you feel good about how far they went.
It's part of the narrative.
Yeah, and it's like that idea of having the confidence, I think, to play with time and leaving people hanging or like changing how they look at it. And you know, Max is mad the whole story because it's such a short amount of time. He doesn't have a character arc. Like there's no time for it, right?
Yeah, he's
like,
got nothing.
He barely has any sort of journey. You could say he like comes to the realization that his mom's not as awful as he thought he was 2 seconds ago, but really that's just like it's only that his emotion like ran out of steam or something.
Yeah, the story arc is that like he was really spicy until he wasn't, and then he like wanted to go home.
Yeah, and I think
tale as old as time.
I think a lot about Max in the context of like I just say one of those old person things. It's like stories today. I'll just like lay it over everything.
Kids these days just don't understand. I had to read this book uphill both ways.
Kids and stories these days aren't as allowed to be messy in this way. I say that as someone with my own work where my characters are very competent, but secretly in my mind, I want to make a Lilo and Stitch. I want a main character that bites another kid.
Yeah.
And it's just a mess.
Yeah.
Because their parents are divorced. Like, you just don't see that in that messy ass way. Like, yes, characters have these backstories, but they're not a disaster.
Yeah, well, they're not like actual kids where I feel like every person I know had some aspect of like a shitty childhood. Not everybody had a bad childhood, but like kids have to go through stuff. Like no matter what. It's either like just regular amount or it's like absolutely awful. But it's somewhere in there. There's no just like, and I was perfect and fine. There was no trauma. Like that's just, you're growing up in the world. Sorry. Like it sucks a little.
Yeah.
So I loved Lilo because I was just like, I was a weird kid. She's weird. I see it. Like, I get it, you know? Why can't we talk more about that instead of... But I feel bad because I'm not the audience for this. But I have noticed there are a lot of kids' things targeted where it's like, so-and-so is like an investigator. But she's like 7 years old or whatever. And it's like, okay, they all have jobs now. And they're like good at their jobs.
Right.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's
not
fun.
A bad thing.
Yeah.
But it's not like... oh, that's me. I can use this to like emotionally get through a dark time in my life as a child or whatever. Like it's not that. It's something else.
I think a lot of it is like, I think, obviously this is coming from me and my experience mostly, but sometimes I want to tell a story about an older category or an older age character because I want to tell a story that fits with that age. But then I have to age the character down to fit with my book. But I don't compromise what they were like when they were older. So suddenly you get a character that's kind of too young to have certain abilities because you want to use those attributes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I find this I think why kid superheroes work well as a thing, like Teen Titans and stuff, because they're just about extremely competent kids. And why are they so competent? Because they're superheroes. Otherwise, other kids would be shitty and a mess.
Yeah.
But even like Spider-Verse... love it, obviously, but Miles is very competent.
Yes.
Always.
Oh, he's like too slick.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want to get into the smart kid school. And it's like, well, then you should have been stupider.
Yeah.
Like, stop being so smart then.
Be like me.
Yeah.
Kind of stupid.
Flunk out.
And it's good, and it feels good to watch somebody be really good at something. But sometimes late at night, you're like, where's everybody messing up like me?
Yeah. Like, I love that movie, Spider-Verse, because it's awesome. Not because I'm like, oh, we're the same.
Yeah.
Which I understand is also part of the tag. Like, everybody could be Spider-Man. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah,
and, like,
it's all good.
Really, I fucking love that movie so much. But I'm not like, and I also am one of them, actually. Like, I'm like, no, I was like not athletic, not cool. Like,
right. Yeah, it's missing some of like it's missing some backstory of like what it was really like to be a little younger than he is now. He just sort of like comes out, sometimes a character comes out as a fully formed, competent thing without a weird backstory.
It's hard for me to be sympathetic to somebody who's like too academically successful.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Like Max.
Sorry you had a good opportunity to go to a good school.
Max definitely like picks his nose in school and is just unaware that people are like, that's kind of gross. He's just in his own weird world and has no qualms about it. I mean, I guess it's sort of, you kind of could like him as a kid. Like, I didn't really have this type of energy. Like, I'm on the page where he chases his dog with a fork.
You better leave that freaking dog alone, though. I tell you what.
And that's a scene that is really prominent in the Spike Jonze movie, like this dog chase scene. And you're like, yeah, kids do that. And my mom would probably be like, yeah, you were mean to your pets. But in my mind, I think that I wasn't this type of kid. But maybe we all just were. I think
it's the fork really changes the tone of things. Like,
yeah, that's true.
My sister, this is so freaking country, but like my sister and I would chase our sheep around when we were kids. And a big pasture, and we couldn't catch them; they were super fast. But it's like, should we have been doing that? Maybe not. But we were never going to harm them.
Yeah.
And like, if you're chasing your dog with a fork, like, yeah, I'm gonna send your ass to your room. You messed up.
You've
Max.
gone too far. Do any final thoughts about like how I feel like I want to start saying more of the final thoughts instead of us just driving off the cliff like Thelma and Louise style. Even though that's
I
really
fucking
fun.
love the idea though that we do that every time. We're just like, wah!
A lot of shows say like any final thoughts, and maybe I just don't want to also do that.
Here's my conclusion.
But I do want to know your final thoughts on
Yeah.
this and how this fits into your
Final
life.
thoughts. Maurice Sendak, the rare individual that captivates you from like a very baby young situation all the way to being like a semi-serious human adult, because he was the whole package. Like, he has all of the stuff that captures you as a child carried through to all of the stuff that you contend with as an adult in a very horrific and dangerous world. And also he was just super prolific. Like, really talented, cross-functionally talented. Multidisciplinary, I think is the word I'm actually looking for.
Yeah.
I just, if you aren't super familiar, because I imagine a lot of people who would listen to this might only know, Where the Wild Things Are and maybe In the Night Kitchen. Same as me, really. Look more into his other work. Pick up this art book. I bought this just sight unseen of all of his other books, and it's one of my favorite art books. He's just a really, really fascinating person and a great artist. And I love his pegboard.
Oh, he's got a great pegboard.
I kind of want to get a pegboard now instead of a corkboard.
Do they make them still?
I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up.
Okay.
More on this later. Chuck, get our Cartoon Feelings branded pegboard at the affiliate link below.
Comes with all the coolest. You can buy it pre-pegged.
Yeah, with knickknacks.
Yeah. Well, that's all for now. We're sailing back home after that wild.
One whole year's worth of episode.
And if you want some more episodes, you can check out the episode archive at cartoonfeelings.com. There's other little things about Caitlin and I, like links and other stuff you could use the website for. And you can tweet at us or join us on Instagram. Both of those are at Feeling Cartoons. And just going to share a special thanks to our producer, Josh Romeo, who just makes it all sound so good and helps us get it out every other Wednesday right on time.
Thanks, Josh. You're amazing. And if you, Josh, or others are enjoying the podcast, please consider rating us on Apple Podcasts, please, or leave us a review, or both, or share us with your friends who like this kind of stuff. And final no or this time, we are on Patreon, and if you like what we're doing and you want to hear more, and we get a little weirder on the Patreon, consider throwing us a couple bucks. Helps us keep the website up, other stuff, etc. Support us. Thank you. Goodbye.
I thought you would do a monster voice.
No, I can't do a monster voice.
Okay.
I'll do it next time.
You don't have a voice for the bird?
Honestly, I never really thought about their voices.
That's true. We didn't talk about that. They don't really have... Josh, this doesn't have to go in. You can wrap it up. But it is kind of a quiet book in a way.
Yeah, I mean, they say one thing, right?
Yeah.
Officially in quotes.
You know what? Maybe that book sucks.